By USA Today Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page. A few things to get out of the way. Number one, CNN and NBC News have both projected Michigan to be going for former Vice President Joe Biden. That puts former Vice President Joe Biden at 264 electoral votes, whereas in President Trump is staying at about 214 electoral votes, with 5 states still out. Susan, let me ask you, at this point, I think we need to ask the question, does President Trump have a pathway at this point to 270 electoral votes?
President Trump does have a pathway. It involves winning everything that is still out. Pennsylvania, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, those are all states in which Biden is at least competitive. He has a small lead in Nevada. Based on where the vote hasn't been counted yet, in both Nevada and in Pennsylvania, the Biden folks are pretty optimistic that they're going to carry those states. But it's not over yet. It's not over until you get to 270. And Joe Biden is just not quite there yet. But he has done one thing important. He's rebuilt 2 of the 3 states that were part of that blue wall that crumbled for Hillary Clinton. He's won Wisconsin, and now he's projected to win Michigan. So the only one that's out in those upper Midwest industrial states is Pennsylvania.
The former vice president gave a speech, Susan, where he seemed to be aiming towards reconciliation, saying, "I'm not declaring myself the victor, but I do believe that my campaign is on the way to victory." He then made the remarks of, look, I'm going to be the president for all Americans. I'm running as a Democrat, but I'm going to be a president for all Americans. Sort of borrowing from President Obama's 2004 DNC speech, saying there's not a red America or a blue America, there's the United States of America. And I thought one of the more poignant comments he made was saying, look, we can't see our opponents as enemies, and ending that by saying we are not enemies. What do you think the former vice president, what chord was he trying to strike with that message? Certainly in contrast to President Trump's tweets and previous comments, no?
So this has been Joe Biden's theme from the day he announced that he wanted to heal a divided nation, that he wanted to move back to a less polarized time. You know, the problem he's going to have is, say he wins the election, looks very likely that he'll have a Republican Senate to contend with. That's going to make governing harder. In fact, he'll be if that happens, he'll be the first Democratic president since Grover Cleveland to come into office without unified control of Congress in his pocket. That's going to make everything harder. And in his remarks today, Biden said he's not naive. He knows it's going to be hard. That is an understatement.
And certainly you saw folks on the left, a lot of commentators saying, you know, we don't want to reconcile with President Trump and his supporters. So he's also going to have to contend with a lot of folks on the left flank of his party who don't seem to have any sort of enthusiasm or want for reconciliation. President Trump's attorney, former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, also held a press conference indicating that there are going to be several lawsuits that they're going to file in Pennsylvania and Michigan and multiple states, making an effort to sort of either slow down or calling into question the vote there. I think the former mayor making comments about Pennsylvania, making a comment about we don't know if there were observers there, the right amount of observers, what distance they were from the vote, really sort of throwing more skepticism. We saw the president tweet out a few moments ago, Susan, sort of adding to that skepticism. What is the point of that? I mean, is this going to the courts? Is that President Trump's sort of last-ditch effort to go to the courts to get to get what he wants out of this? Or is he trying to maybe rile up his base to say, I mean, there's really no point. All the votes have been cast. There's no more voting to be done. What politically is advantageous for the Trump campaign to take this direction?
You know, I don't think it's the tactics of somebody who thinks he's about to win the election. It's the tactics of someone who's trying to think, is there anything I can do to stop losing this election? You know, he's filing for a recount in Wisconsin. Well, he's 20,000 votes behind in Wisconsin. He's losing by a bigger margin in Michigan than he won by last time. I think that some independent analysts look at his threats of lawsuits and they don't really see the grounds on which to file a lawsuit. But I guess we'll find out. I mean, perhaps he has in his memory that election of 2000, which went on for more than a month after Election Day and ended up in the Supreme Court. But the fact is, we don't at this moment see the legal grounds to really question what's happening in the count in these key battleground states that are just about to finish up the job.
paying attention to our colleagues across the USA Today network, I noticed particularly reporter Joey Garrison remarking on, who's focused on Pennsylvania, where President Trump has about a 356,000 vote lead, according to Garrison's last count, but saying there are still about 900,000 plus votes that haven't been accounted for, and that Biden is eating those votes up. Even in Georgia, where this morning President Trump had a 100,000 vote lead, that's dwindled now to about 77,000. I just think it's fascinating, Susan, that we're seeing President Trump with these leads, but then former Vice President Biden eating into them with overwhelming margins, sometimes 5 to 1, 4 to 1 in the mail-in. I mean, at this point for President Trump, like you mentioned earlier, there doesn't seem to be a clear pathway other than a perfect, sweep of these remaining states. If you're Joe Biden, you've been running for president really since I was born, for about 30 years. Are you anxious at this point, or do you seem confident? I mean, as you mentioned, might be coming in with a Republican Senate, but for former Vice President Biden, I would think this is the most anxious moment. You're just there, 6 electoral votes away, projected-wise. Is he nervous?
So the Biden campaign says that they're not nervous. They say they believe they've already got this election won, and it's just a matter of these final states coming in with their tallies. And of course, this is a prize that Joe Biden's been running for decades. Finally won, and he'll be taking. I don't think he's nervous, but I think he seems very aware of the burden that he'll be taking on if he does win the election. We haven't had a newly elected president take office in such difficult circumstances with such a big national crisis going on since FDR took over, was inaugurated for the first time during the Great Depression. This is going to be serious stuff for Joe Biden. He's been around long enough to know that.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, I mean, we very rarely fire or remove a president by the voters. I mean, I think George H.W. Bush back in 1992 was the last sitting president who was voted out. You have to go back then to Jimmy Carter. I mean, we very rarely do this. So this is a momentous occasion just by itself. Final question for me, I guess, Susan, would be this. When I look at what former Vice President Joe Biden is saying, sort of stitching this together, do you think we're going to have a concession at any point by the president if it gets to that point? Or, like you said, he has to sweep everything else. He has to have a perfect, rest of the election here. Is he going to call up Joe Biden and say, hey, Joe, spirited race, thank you very much? Or is this going to be a lawsuit that's just going to keep going on in multiple states? And what position would that put Biden in? Does he have to postpone a transition? I know we're making a lot of presumptions here. And again, there's always a possibility. We should never count out Donald Trump. There were many folks in the media and others who were saying, oh, there's no way Donald Trump could win the presidency, and look where we are now. But it does look like that he's the person who has to have a perfect night. He has a harder time getting to 270 than Biden. Do you think he's going to, concede here at all, or we're going to have a normal transition here?
So it's a courtesy for the loser to concede. It's not a legal necessity. It's not up to Donald Trump whether he's won or lost the election. And in fact, it's not up to Donald Trump whether his administration cooperates with the peaceful transition of power with the victors transition committee from election day until inauguration day. That is a matter of federal law. Those people are already working now. Some administrations are more cooperative than others, but it's not up to the president whether they do so.
Right. Well, Susan Page, our Washington bureau chief, we are sitting on pins and needles here, waiting for the 270 threshold to be crossed by one of these two candidates for president. The 2020 election, 2020 is not disappointing us. I know we didn't get a 269 tie, as Anna thought, but we're certainly here on pins and needles. Susan, thank you for joining me.